there is something in Brad Thor's book that I found really, really disturbing. I mean, one of the most disturbing things, I brought it in yesterday to show it to Pat and asked Pat to read it. Am I wrong? It's unbelievable. I want to just read, this is from chapter 46. Brad Thor has a new book called Full Black. Up until TIP, Nicholas said, the gold standard in intelligence software belonged to the United States. The American company called Inslaw Manufacturing manufactured the premier collection case management and analysis system called PROMIS, Prosecutors Management Information System. Now, look this up. You won't find very much on the internet, but it's true. It was a precursor to TIP, the new operating system, and it operated 24/7 looking for the nexuses and correlations between people, places, and organizations. It's brilliantly adept at accessing proprietary corporate databases like those of banks, credit card companies, electric, water, and gas utilities. Running algorithms, it built amazing relationship trees outlining exactly who knows and who interacts with the subject. For example, if you're subject of an investigation and you started using more water or electricity, it would suspect that you had people staying with you. It would then search through all of your phone records and emails looking for your contacts that had suddenly stopped or reduced their usage of specific utilities and suggest that they might be the ones at your house. This would be backed up with credit card transactions showing train or plane ticket purchases, gasoline, etc. PROMIS would then focus on these people and pull up all of their records, searching for any criminal history, mentions of them in previous investigations, and any and all hints of a conspiracy that might exist between you and what might actually entail. It was like the Terminator. It never slept, it never stopped, and the U.S. was all too happy to share this software with its allied intelligence partners. This technology is old. Wait until you hear the new technology. We have Brad Thor to back this up from his book Full Black. Brad, PROMIS is real.
PROMIS is 100% real.
Developed in the 1970s originally to help prosecutors.
Yes, the idea is that they wanted to be able to spin a case file, spin in the literal sense, not in the figurative no spin zone kind of a thing. What they wanted to be able to do was look at a file based upon who the arresting officer was, the prisoner was, the judge was, and what they used it for originally was to say, okay, let's look at the defense lawyer here. Let's look at all the defense lawyer's cases. How often does he cave in and take a plea bargain? At what point in the process does he? How minimal of an offer has to be offered before the defense lawyer takes a plea for his client? Very, very interesting. Then the intelligence agencies got a hold of it, and that's when this thing started getting freaky.
Okay, so tell me how this is used before you even get into tips. Is it still being used? And then tell me what tips is.
Yeah, it is still being used. What happened is, and we won't get into the weeds about the original intent of the people who built this thing was to use it just to help the court system be more efficient. And then the intelligence agencies said, this thing is amazing, and it's being underutilized. We can just do some incredible things. They took it and started tweaking it, and that's what ticked off the original software manufacturers. They didn't want it to be used for that kind of thing, especially without paying them. What ended up happening was the intel agency said, oh, if this can track people in the court system, it can track people in real life. And so they taught this thing how to hack into all these different databases to start getting more information than just who's the defense attorney, who's the arresting officer. That's where you get into credit card purchases and all this kind of stuff. What ended up happening was it got offered to some of our allies. With a convenient trapdoor built into it so that if allied intelligence agencies started using it, our intel guys could see what they were doing with it. And one of the copies ended up getting out there on the black market. So people that we didn't want to have the PROMIS program got it. And one particular example is the intel guys in South Africa during the apartheid days. And they used it to track and kill dissidents. As a matter of fact, a lot of other governments realized, wait a second, this is fantastic. If we've only got a physical description of a dissident we're looking for, we can put that into the PROMIS system, and we can get hits when anybody crosses a border who matches that, or anybody shows up at a bus station in a tiny town in our country.
Explain how it was used in South Africa to kill dissidents. What do you mean?
Well, I'll give you a specific example. The South Africans had a rumor that there was an impending miners' strike, and that it was going to be a crippling strike for the country. And they had only a little bit of information. They knew maybe one or two people who were involved, supposedly that were going to be involved with the strike, but they didn't know for sure. So they loaded those two people into the system. They put everything they could find about these two people into the system, and then let the system, like I said, it's like the Terminator, it never sleeps, start building data, start looking at the history of these people. The thing is, you don't leave a digital footprint in the world anymore. You leave a digital shadow. It tells the government where you are right now, not where you've been. They're not playing catch-up. They know exactly where you're standing in relation to the sun, if you will. So what they did is they figured out who two people lightly associated with this miners' strike were, and they went, just based on that information, Promise found all the organizers of the strike. They disappeared. They never were seen again. The strike did not happen.
Wow. What do you say to people, Brad, who say,
well, I'm not doing anything wrong, and neither are any of my friends. Why should I worry about them knowing what I'm doing?
Because, Pat, there's going to come a time where it doesn't matter if you're doing anything wrong. All it's going to matter is you don't stand in the proper place as far as the government's concerned. Listen, you guys know me. I've been on all the time with you. I am the biggest pro-military, pro-law enforcement guy. But there's a lot of stuff happening that, I don't want the government being able to look at my list of library books under the Patriot Act.
How do you find out about this stuff? Can you say?
I've got people, listen, there are good people out there in the intelligence community who don't like this stuff.
Yeah, they're spooked. I talk to people, I don't have the kind of contacts you do, but I've talked to people who are in the intelligence community and in the military and everything else that are spooked as hell by some of the stuff that, you continue going down the road that we're going down, and this is very dangerous stuff. Now, that is the old technology of Promise. Now, when we come back, Brad will tell you about the new technology of tips and what he knows about that. Coming up in just a second. Brad Thor is here with us. He has a new book out. It's a thriller called Full Black. It really is. It could be the last 2 years of my work on Fox News tied together all in a storyline form so you understand it, but it's not that, because this is anything that sounds like it's really happening, like any kind of current people, like
total
Soros,
coincidence.
Complete, pure fiction, total coincidence. With an exception of some things that obviously are very real, and I wrote Brad this weekend and said, please tell me that tips and Promise are not real. He just explained Promise. Now explain what tips is.
Okay, so Promise, as I've said, was like the Terminator. And if Promise is the Terminator, then TIPS is Skynet, the artificial intelligence force behind the Terminator, directing the Terminator, telling it what to do. So what ended up happening was, since we built a backdoor that allow us to spy on anybody who took Promise into their intel agency, any of our allied partners, there was a company. I had to change it in the book, Glenn. It is not called TIP, Total Intelligence Paradigm. One of my guys who led me to this thing and laid it out for me, when he read the book, he said, you can't put this in there. He said, it will track right back to me. You got to call it something else. So I changed the name. Anyway, what TIPS is, what it's based on, is a real software system where they took the Promise system and gave it a brain. They gave it artificial intelligence so that this thing could not only hunt for data, it could anticipate. If there was information about an attack that the government was afraid was going to happen, this thing would start going through its citizenry, trying to figure out which of the citizens were best equipped and most likely to commit whatever crime it is that the government or the intel agency thought was going to be committed.
We're down to Minority Report.
That's exactly what it is. I was told by one of my sources that they actually had a successful apprehension of a subject using this new software, and that the government in question, who had sponsored the building of this software, it's not ours, it is in the Western world, was giddy beyond belief that now all they needed to do was somebody to whisper during an interrogation that something might be about to happen, and they set this thing loose on its own populace. It's terrifying.
Brad, I talked to some people at Google, who are quite frankly afraid of Google. Google is a fine company. It's done a lot of great things. It's a great search. That's the only search engine that really works. But if you read in the Plex?
In the Plex.
Yeah, if you read that and you read it with a mind of the future, if you've ever read any Ray Kurzweil, The Age of Spiritual Machines is one that everybody should read. If you've ever read any Ray Kurzweil, who is a futurist, who is works for Google and Microsoft and everything else, and then you read in the Plex, they're creating artificial intelligence, and they're with our government.
Glenn, I will even take you in another direction on the same thing. I would say that if you're recommending that people read those two books, they also need to read Search and Destroy, which is a real scathing expose of Google. Search and Destroy, great book. Listen, when we talk about tips, the thing that's frightening here is that Google is partnered up with the NSA, and what they're trying to do is create their own Skynet, and what they're using is the millions of searches on Google every day. How you search, what you ask a question, when you go to that Google search toolbar and you punch in your question for what you're looking on the net, that is teaching this artificial intelligence thing that Google is building how to think. They're trying to teach this artificial brain how to think like people. And I got to tell you, Google's done some great things, but I have a real problem with a company whose motto is "Don't be evil," but their mascot is a T-Rex.
I have a real problem with any company that is in bed with the United States government.
Absolutely.
There's no. I'm sorry. Private companies are private companies. When you're in bed with the United States government as tightly as Google is, and you're doing things as spooky as Google. I mean, there's a reason why Google is getting kicked out or coming under economic fire in almost every country in the world. Our country is sending that stuff over to other countries. It's frightening stuff.